The sun had not yet risen over the dusty hills when Amina stepped outside her small, broken hut. The air was cold, and the ground beneath her feet was dry and cracked. The village of Kifaru had known poverty for many years. The land was harsh, the crops were weak, and opportunities were almost impossible to find. Amina wrapped her thin cloth tightly around her shoulders as the wind brushed against her skin. Hunger had become a normal part of her life. Some days she ate only once. Other days, she ate nothing at all. Her home was barely standing. The roof leaked whenever it rained, and the walls had cracks wide enough for the wind to pass through. Yet every morning, she woke up before everyone else. Not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. She walked toward the river with a heavy bucket in her hand. The path was long, and the rocks along the road cut into her worn-out sandals. By the time she reached the river, the sky had begun to glow with the soft colors of dawn. Other villagers were already there. Some looked at her with pity. Others whispered and laughed. A few women shook their heads when they saw her. "Poor Amina," one of them murmured quietly. Another woman smirked. "She has been poor all her life. Nothing will ever change for her." The word stung, but Amina had learned not to react. She kept her eyes down and filled her bucket with water. She had heard those words many times before. But deep inside her heart, something still refused to break. Despite the hunger, despite the loneliness, despite the endless struggle, a small flame of hope still burned inside her. Amina believed that life could change, even if the whole world thought otherwise. As she lifted the bucket and began the long walk back home, something unexpected happened. A strange vehicle entered the village road, raising clouds of dust behind it. Villagers stopped what they were doing and stared. Cars almost never came to Kifaru. The vehicle slowly rolled toward the center of the village. And without knowing it, Amina's life was about to change forever. Amina had never known an easy life. She was only a young woman, yet her face carried the tired expression of someone who had lived through many storms. Her parents had died when she was still a child. After that, life became a constant struggle. There was no one to guide her. No one to protect her. No one to help her survive. She had learned everything the hard way. Amina worked wherever she could. Some days she carried firewood from the forest. Other days she washed clothes for wealthier families in the village. The work was exhausting. But the pay was very small. Sometimes people did not pay her at all. Yet she rarely complained. She believed that hard work was the only path she had. Many villagers did not respect her. They saw her as a poor woman with no future. One man in the village often laughed when he saw her working. "You work like a donkey," he once said. "But you will still die poor." Those words followed her like a shadow. But not everyone treated her badly. An old woman named Memazi often watched Amina from her small shop. Memazi admired the young woman's strength. Most people would have given up long ago. But Amina kept fighting. Even when she was hungry. Even when she was tired. Even when the world treated her unfairly. Still, there were nights when the pain felt too heavy. Late one evening, Amina sat alone inside her dark hut. Her stomach was empty. Her body ached from hours of hard labor. She stared at the small candle burning beside her. For the first time in many years, tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. A quiet fear filled her heart. What if the villagers were right? What if nothing ever changed? What if this was the life she was meant to live forever? For a moment, Amina felt her hope begin to fade. And in that lonely moment, she almost gave up. The next morning, the village was filled with excitement. The strange vehicle that had arrived the day before belonged to a businessman from the city. His name was Mr. Kofi. He had come to the village looking for skilled people who could produce traditional handmade baskets and crafts. These items were popular in the city markets. And he was willing to pay good money for them. The news spread quickly through the village. Many people rushed to show their work. Amina watched quietly from a distance. She had learned how to weave baskets when she was young. Her mother had taught her before she passed away. But Amina had never believed that her skill was worth anything. To her, it was simply something she did to survive. Memazi approached her gently. "You should show him your work," the old woman said. Amina shook her head. "No one will care about my baskets." But Memazi refused to give up. She dragged Amina to the meeting place. Mr. Kofi carefully examined the baskets that people brought. Many of them were ordinary. But when he picked up one of Amina's baskets, his eyes widened with surprise. The design was beautiful. The weaving was strong and detailed. It was unlike anything he had seen that day. For a moment, the crowd fell silent. Then whispers began spreading through the villages. How is that possible? Amina made that. Some people looked shocked. Others looked annoyed. But inside Amina's heart, fear began to rise. What if she failed? What if this chance disappeared? Still, deep down, another voice whispered inside her. Maybe this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. After a long moment of silence, Amina made a quiet decision. She would take the risk, even if the road ahead was uncertain. At first, the journey was harder than Amina had imagined. Mr. Kofi gave her a small contract to produce baskets for his store in the city. But Amina had many problems. She had very little money. The materials she needed were expensive. And some villagers tried to cheat her by selling poor-quality supplies. More than once, she almost lost everything. There were days when she worked until her hands bled. There were nights when exhaustion made her collapse onto the floor of her hut. Sometimes she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But during one difficult moment, someone unexpected stepped forward to help her. It was Mama Z. The old woman offered Amina a small loan and a place to store her materials safely. More importantly, she gave Amina encouragement. "You are stronger than you think," Mama Z said. Those words gave Amina the courage to continue. Slowly, she improved her skills. She experimented with new designs. She worked harder than ever before. And one day, something finally changed. Mr. Kofi returned with exciting news. The baskets were selling very well in the city. For the first time in her life, Amina felt the smallest sign that success might be possible. Months passed. Amina's work became known in nearby towns. Her baskets were different from the others. They were stronger, more beautiful, more unique. Orders began arriving faster than she could complete them. For the first time in her life, she had steady income. She repaired her house. She bought proper tools. And she even hired 2 village women to help her. The same villagers who once laughed at her now watched her with surprise. Some even asked her for advice. But the biggest change was inside Amina. The shy, uncertain woman had slowly transformed. She walked with confidence. She spoke with strength. One evening, as she counted the money from a large order, a powerful realization filled her heart. She was no longer struggling just to survive. Her life had truly changed. As Amina's success grew, her life became more comfortable. She moved into a larger home. She had enough food every day. And she no longer feared the future. But wealth brought new challenges. People who once ignored her now visited her often. Some wanted business deals. Others simply wanted money. Even the villagers who once mocked her suddenly treated her with kindness. But Amina could feel something strange in their smiles. Not all of it was sincere. Jealousy began spreading through the village. Whispers followed her everywhere. For the first time, Amina wondered what true wealth really meant. Was it money? Or something deeper? One day, a man who had once insulted Amina came to her door. His family was struggling. He needed help. Amina remembered every cruel word he had spoken to her in the past. For a moment, anger rose inside her heart. She had every reason to refuse. But then she remembered her own painful journey. She remembered hunger, loneliness, and the feeling of being powerless. Slowly, her anger faded. Instead of revenge, she chose kindness. She helped him. And in that moment, Amina discovered a truth that wealth alone could never teach. Forgiveness was far more powerful than revenge. Years later, Amina became one of the most respected women in the region. But she never forgot where she came from. She built a small workshop in the village. There, she taught young women how to weave baskets and earn their own income. Slowly, the village began to change. Poverty no longer controlled every life. Hope returned to the community. The same villagers who once doubted her now spoke of her with admiration. But Amina never called herself rich. Because she had learned something important. True wealth is not measured by money. It is measured by strength, by kindness, and by the courage to rise again after life knocks you down. In the quiet village of Kifaru, life had never been easy for Amina. Most people in the village struggled to survive, but Amina's life seemed harder than most. While others had families to support them, she had been alone for many years. Her parents had died when she was still a young girl. The memory of that time still lived in her heart like a deep scar. One sickness had taken her mother, and soon after, her father's strength faded as well. Within a short time, the small house that once felt full of love had become silent and empty. From that day forward, Amina had to grow up quickly. While other children played under the warm sun, Amina worked. She carried water, gathered firewood, and searched the dry land for anything that could help her survive. Life had forced her to become strong before she was ready. But even as the years passed, one thing about Amina never changed. Her spirit. She was quiet and humble, but she had a heart full of determination. No matter how difficult life became, she believed in working honestly and treating people with kindness. Every morning before sunrise, Amina began her daily routine. First, she walked the long path to the river to collect water. After that, she often headed toward the forest to gather firewood. The bundle of wood she carried on her back was usually heavier than it looked, but she had grown used to the weight. Later in the day, she sometimes worked for wealthier families in the village. She washed their clothes, cleaned their yards, or helped prepare food during busy days. The work was exhausting, and the pay was very small. Some days she returned home with only a few coins in her pocket. Other days, she received nothing at all. But Amina rarely complained. She had learned that complaining did not change reality. Still, life in the village was not always kind to her. Some villagers looked down on Amina because of her poverty. A man named Django often mocked her whenever he saw her carrying firewood through the village. One afternoon, as Amina struggled under a large bundle of wood, Django laughed loudly with his friends. "Look at her," he said with a smirk. "She works like an ox every day, yet she is still the poorest woman here." His friends laughed. The sound echoed through the dusty street. Amina felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but she kept walking. She had heard such words many times before. Yet not everyone treated her that way. There was one person in the village who saw something different in Amina. Mama Zee. Mama Zee was an elderly woman who owned a small shop near the center of the village. She sold salt, oil, and a few simple goods that villagers needed. From her chair outside the shop, she often watched Amina working from morning until sunset. The old woman admired her quiet strength. Many people in the village had stronger bodies than Amina, but very few had a stronger heart. One evening, as Amina passed by the shop carrying a bundle of reeds she had gathered near the river, Mama Zee called out to her. "You work too hard, child," the old woman said gently. Amina smiled politely, though her face showed deep exhaustion. "Work is the only thing I have," she replied softly. Mama Zee watched her walk away and sighed. She knew the world had not been fair to this young woman. As the days passed, the weight of Amina's struggles grew heavier. Hunger followed her like a shadow. There were nights when she had nothing to eat except a small piece of dry bread. Other nights, she drank water and forced herself to sleep so she would not feel the pain in her stomach. Loneliness was another silent burden. The small hut where she lived felt colder each night. There was no laughter, no conversation, and no comforting voice waiting for her. Sometimes she wondered what life would have been like if her parents were still alive. Perhaps things would have been different. Perhaps she would not feel so invisible in the world. But these thoughts only made the silence deeper. One evening, after a long day of work, Amina sat outside her hut and watched the sun slowly disappear behind the distant hills. The sky turned shades of orange and purple. It was a beautiful sight. But Amina could not feel the beauty. Her body was tired. Her stomach was empty. And her heart was heavy with doubt. She thought about her life. About the endless days of hard work. About the cruel laughter of those who believed she would never succeed. A painful question slowly formed in her mind. What if they were right? What if her life would always remain the same? The thought frightened her. For years, hope had been the one thing that kept her moving forward. Even when life was cruel, she believed that someday things might change. But that evening, sitting alone in the fading light, her hope felt weaker than ever before. Tears slowly filled her eyes. For the first time in a long while, Amina felt close to surrender. Close to accepting that her life might never rise beyond poverty. The darkness of night slowly covered the village. And inside her small, quiet hut, Amina sat alone with her doubts. Not knowing that the next chapter of her life was already beginning to unfold. The morning after the strange car arrived, the village of Kifaru buzzed with excitement. For years, life had been predictable, quiet, and harsh, but now something unusual had come into their world, and everyone could feel it. The car belonged to a man named Mr. Kofi, a businessman from the city. He had traveled far to visit Kifaru, searching for skilled artisans who could create traditional baskets and crafts. These were not ordinary baskets. They needed to be strong, beautifully designed, and unique. In the city, people would pay handsomely for them, and Mr. Kofi wanted the best. Word spread quickly through the village. Villagers gathered near the center, holding their baskets, hoping to catch his attention. Some were nervous. Some were eager. Others were already planning how they would spend the money they might earn. Amina stayed on the outskirts, clutching a small, worn basket she had woven the night before. She had learned the craft from her mother, long ago, but had never considered it valuable. To her, weaving baskets was survival, not a talent. Mama Zeri, the elderly shopkeeper who had always quietly supported Amina, noticed her hesitation. She approached the young woman gently. "Why are you standing back?" Mama Z asked softly. "Your work is as good as anyone's. You should show Mr. Kofi." Amina shook her head. "No one will care about my baskets. They are simple, ordinary." Mama Z's eyes softened, but she did not give up. Sometimes, the world only notices what it has never seen before. "Take a chance, Amina." Amina hesitated. Fear gripped her heart. What if she failed? What if everyone laughed at her again? What if this opportunity was just another disappointment in a long line of disappointments? Her hands trembled as she held her basket. She looked around at the other villagers, watching as they proudly displayed their work. Some baskets were well made, some were rushed. Some artisans smiled confidently, others fidgeted nervously. When it was her turn, Amina took a deep breath and stepped forward. She placed her small basket on the table in front of Mr. Kofi. He examined it slowly, turning it in his hands. The weaving was tight, the patterns careful, the design thoughtful. He ran his fingers over the smooth edges. His eyes widened slightly, and he nodded to himself. "Who made this?" he asked. Amina swallowed and answered quietly, "I did, my name is Amina." The crowd went silent. Whispers spread quickly, "Amina? She made that?" Some people looked impressed, others confused. A few frowned in envy. Mr. Kofi looked up at Amina and smiled. "This is remarkable. The craftsmanship, the detail, very few people can make something like this. I would like to buy more, and perhaps, more than that. I could offer you a contract to supply baskets regularly." Amina froze. She wanted to believe him, but the fear in her chest would not let her. I don't know," she stammered. "I've never done this before, for business." "You can learn," Mr. Kofi replied kindly. "I will help you. I see talent in you. Talent is rare." Mama Z reached for Amina's hand and squeezed it. "See? I told you. Don't let fear stop you." Amina looked down at her hands, the same hands that had labored for years with no recognition. She thought of her empty hut, the cold nights, the hunger, the endless work. Could this really be the chance she had been waiting for? The villagers' reactions were mixed. Some cheered quietly for her, whispering encouragement. Others shook their heads, some even laughed under their breath. "She will fail," they said. "Poor Amina, always dreaming too much." But inside Amina, something shifted. The fear was still there, yes, but it was joined by another feeling, a spark of hope, small but bright. Perhaps this was the opportunity she had longed for all her life. Perhaps this could finally be the change she needed. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. One decision could alter her path forever. And for the first time in years, she felt ready to take a risk. "I will try," she said quietly, but firmly. A smile spread across Mr. Kofi's face. "Good. Come with me tomorrow, and we will begin." As Amina walked back toward her hut, her mind swirled with disbelief. The village looked the same, dusty roads, cracked walls, and simple homes, but something inside her felt different. The future suddenly seemed a little brighter, a little closer, a little real. That night, she lay on her thin mat, staring at the ceiling. She could still hear the whispers of doubt from the villagers, the echoes of past failures, but they seemed distant now. Tonight, hope had returned. For the first time in her life, Amina felt that maybe, just maybe, her life could change. And without realizing it, the path toward her new future had already begun. The next morning, Amina stepped into a world that felt both exciting and frightening. Mr. Kofi had promised to guide her, but the reality of running a small business was far more challenging than she had imagined. She had a contract to supply baskets to the city, and at first glance, it seemed simple. But the deeper she got, the more she realized how much she had to learn. The first obstacle appeared almost immediately: materials. The reeds and fibers she needed were expensive, far beyond what she could afford. Every coin she had saved over the years disappeared quickly, and even then, some vendors tried to cheat her, selling her poor-quality supplies at full price. She returned home one afternoon with brittle fibers that snapped under her fingers, her hands aching, and her heart sinking. "This is impossible," she whispered to herself. She wanted to throw the bundle into the river and give up. But she couldn't. Hunger and poverty had taught her that giving up meant surrendering completely. And so, she tried again. Every day was a battle. She woke before dawn, worked until the sun disappeared behind the hills, and still found time to weave her baskets with care and precision. Her hands bled from the constant weaving. Her back ached from carrying materials. Nights were spent mending baskets that had cracked during the day, or experimenting with new designs in hopes of impressing Mr. Kofi even more. Some days, Amina returned to her hut with barely enough energy to eat. Other nights, the exhaustion was so heavy she collapsed on her mat and cried herself to sleep. The villagers watched her struggle. Some whispered, "She will never succeed." Others mocked her openly. "She works herself to death for nothing," they said. And yet, despite the weight of failure pressing down on her, she kept moving forward. Amina's greatest moments of doubt came when she feared that all her work had been wasted. Once, she completed an order that had taken 3 full days of effort, only to see Mr. Kofi reject some of the baskets because the colors were slightly uneven. Her heart sank. Tears stung her eyes, but she swallowed them and listened to his advice. "Keep practicing. Every mistake is a lesson," he said. Even when hope felt fragile, Amina found small sparks that reminded her why she had started. Mama Zay, who had always quietly watched her, offered support whenever she could. She gave Amina a small loan to buy quality materials and even provided a safe place to store her baskets. Sometimes, she would sit beside Amina at night, telling her stories about other people who had risen from nothing. "You have the strength, child," Mama Zee said. "Your hands can create wonders. But it is your heart that will carry you through the storms." Her words became Amina's anchor. Slowly, she began experimenting with new weaving patterns. She combined colors in ways the villagers had never seen before, made stronger baskets, and added small details that gave each one a unique character. Despite the constant struggle, something began to shift. Orders arrived more frequently. Mr. Kofi started recommending her work to other buyers. The city markets showed interest. But with every small success came more challenges. One morning, she discovered that a vendor had stolen some of her fibers, selling them for a profit and leaving her without the materials she needed for an urgent order. Another time, she lost a large shipment on the rough, dusty road between the village and the city. Each setback felt like a punch to the chest, yet she refused to let it break her. At times, the fear of failure was overwhelming. She would sit by the river at dusk, watching the water ripple over the rocks, and wonder if all her effort was worth it. Perhaps she had been foolish to believe that her life could change. Perhaps she would always be poor, no matter how hard she tried. But then, she would remember the small flame of hope that had never left her heart, even in the darkest moments of her childhood. And with that memory, she found the strength to continue. Her determination began to pay off in small ways. Orders were completed on time. Customers complimented her work. Even some villagers who had mocked her in the past began to notice her skill. A turning point came unexpectedly. Mr. Kofi returned one afternoon with a large order from a prominent city store. "These baskets are selling fast," he told her with a smile. "People want more. You are on your way, Amina. Keep going." Her heart raced. For the first time, she could imagine a future where her hard work mattered, where her talent was recognized, where her life could finally change. Yet, she knew the journey was far from over. Every day still brought new challenges. Every success was accompanied by exhaustion and uncertainty. But Amina had learned the most important lesson of all: she could endure. She could persevere. And she could rise, no matter how many times the world tried to push her down. That evening, she sat outside her hut, her hands sore and her back aching, but a quiet satisfaction filled her heart. The path was difficult. The nights were long. And the road ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time, Amina believed that her dreams were not impossible. She believed that her life could change. And in that belief, she found hope. Hope that would carry her through the trials yet to come, and lead her toward the life she had always imagined. Months passed since Amina had taken her first hesitant step into the world of weaving for Mr. Kofi. Each day was still filled with labor and long hours, but slowly, the fruits of her hard work began to appear. The baskets she once made for survival were no longer just a necessity, they were now treasures in the eyes of others. At first, the changes were small. A buyer from a nearby town came to see her work. He inspected the baskets carefully, running his hands over the intricate patterns and strong, smooth edges. Then, with a smile, he placed an order larger than any Amina had ever received. Her heart raced as she realized that someone was willing to pay for her skill, not just her time or labor, but the quality and care she poured into her work. Word began to spread. Soon, orders came from other towns, and even from the city itself. Mr. Kofi recommended her baskets to several of his business partners, and her small workshop, once nothing more than a corner of her hut, began to grow. She hired 2 women from the village to help her, teaching them the careful technique she had mastered over the years. With each order, Amina's confidence grew. She no longer worked simply to survive. She worked to create, to improve, and to excel. Every basket became a symbol of her resilience, a testament to how far she had come. Even the villagers who had once laughed at her began to notice. Some of them approached her cautiously, complimenting her work or asking for advice. Their eyes were wide with surprise, their voices filled with disbelief. She made all of this herself, one woman whispered, glancing at the piles of baskets waiting to be delivered to the city. She's changed, said a man, shaking his head. I never thought I'd see it. Amina has risen. Yet Amina's greatest transformation was not in the opinions of others, it was within herself. She remembered the nights she had cried in her hut, the days she had struggled under the hot sun, the endless hunger and humiliation she had endured. And now, here she was, creating something valuable, respected, and admired. One afternoon, a particularly large order arrived from a city store that sold handmade crafts. Amina worked tirelessly for 3 days straight to complete it. She wove late into the night, her fingers raw and sore, her eyes heavy with fatigue. But when she finally finished and delivered the baskets, she saw the reaction of the store owner. These are incredible, he said, lifting one basket gently. I've never seen anything like them. I want to place weekly orders for all of your designs. We need more of this, people will pay for quality like this every time. Amina felt tears sting her eyes. It was the first time she realized just how far she had come. Her skill, once overlooked and undervalued, was now something people were willing to invest in. She had turned her talent into opportunity. Her confidence grew in ways she had never experienced before. She began experimenting with new designs and colors, taking creative risks she would have been too afraid to attempt before. Each innovation brought new recognition, more buyers, and even more orders. As her business grew, Amina's life began to change outside her work as well. She repaired her old hut, turning it into a small but comfortable home. She bought better tools and materials. She was finally able to feed herself properly and sleep without the gnawing pain of hunger. For the first time, she could imagine a future that didn't revolve solely around survival. One evening, as she counted the money from a particularly large city order, she paused. Her hands trembled slightly as she ran her fingers over the coins. She remembered all the nights she had gone to bed hungry, all the days she had walked barefoot over rough paths carrying firewood or water, all the times she had been mocked by villagers. And now, she realized something powerful, she was no longer powerless. Her life had changed. The realization filled her with both awe and gratitude. Amina allowed herself a rare moment of pride. She had earned this, not through luck, but through determination, patience, and unwavering perseverance. She had faced every trial, every insult, every moment of doubt, and she had continued. The village itself began to feel different. The same streets, the same dusty paths, the same cracked walls, they were unchanged, but the way she moved through them had changed. People no longer saw a helpless girl. They saw a woman who had carved her own path from nothing. Even those who had doubted her the most began to pay attention. Children pointed at her in admiration, whispering to their friends, "That's Amina, she made it." Yet, despite all the recognition, Amina remained humble. She remembered her struggles, the nights of hunger and isolation, and the fear that she might never rise above her circumstances. Those memories grounded her, reminding her of the importance of patience, perseverance, and kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Amina stood outside her workshop, watching the soft light settle over the village. She looked at the baskets neatly stacked inside, ready to be sent to the city, and then at the small group of women she had hired, working quietly beside her. A sense of quiet satisfaction filled her. She had turned her life around, yes, but more importantly, she had transformed herself. She was no longer a woman defined by poverty, by struggle, or by the mockery of others. She was defined by her skill, her strength, and her courage to rise. For the first time in her life, Amina felt a deep, unshakable certainty. Her life would never be the same again. The path had been long, exhausting, and painful. She had faced betrayal, exhaustion, and doubt. She had endured the mocking laughter of villagers and the sting of failure. And yet, here she stood, stronger, wiser, and finally free to shape her own destiny. Amina smiled softly to herself. The journey was far from over, she knew that. New challenges would come. New obstacles would appear. But for the first time, she felt ready. Ready to face whatever lay ahead. Because now, she understood something essential. Survival was no longer her only goal. She was on a path to success, and she had the strength to see it through. Her life had changed. And she would never look back. Amina's success continued to grow, slowly but surely transforming her life. The baskets she wove with patient hands and tireless care had become highly sought after in the city. Orders poured in from neighboring towns, and her small workshop began to expand. For the first time, she could see the fruits of her labor not only in money but in real, lasting change in her life. Her hut, once cold and cracked, was replaced by a sturdier, larger home. The roof no longer leaked, and the walls were strong enough to withstand storms. For the first time in her life, she slept through the night without the gnawing pain of hunger keeping her awake. She could afford proper meals, fresh water, and basic comforts she had never dreamed of before. Yet with wealth came unexpected complications. Villagers who had ignored or mocked her for years suddenly sought her out. They came to her doorstep, smiling and bowing their heads, hoping for small favors or seeking advice on business matters. Some were sincere in their interest, but others hid their envy behind forced smiles. Amina's heart ached at first. She remembered the cruel words, the laughter, the scorn. And now, those very people were approaching her for help, as if the past had never existed. Old enemies, once secure in their superiority over her, now watched her success with open jealousy. Whispered words traveled quickly through the village. "She has become rich, how did she do it? What is she hiding?" Even those who had once ignored her now came asking for loans, favors, or special treatment. Every visit, every request, felt like a test of her patience and judgment. Amina began to feel a strange, unfamiliar weight. The freedom she had worked so hard to achieve was now accompanied by pressure. How could she trust people who had once wished her failure? How could she decide who deserved help and who was simply trying to take advantage of her? One morning, as she sipped tea on her porch, she watched two villagers approach her gate. Both had once mocked her, but now their faces were careful, polite, and hopeful. "Please, Amina," one said. "We need your help. Our crops have failed, and we have nothing to feed our children." Amina looked at them, her mind racing. She wanted to help, but she also felt the bitter sting of the past. These were the same people who had laughed at her struggles, who had called her weak, who had whispered cruelly behind her back. Could she forgive them? Could she trust them now? Her heart twisted in uncertainty. For the first time, she realized that wealth was not just a blessing, it was a responsibility. Money could solve some problems, but it could not erase past pain. It could not answer the questions of trust, loyalty, or true character. At night, as she sat in her workshop counting orders and payments, she pondered what wealth really meant. Was it just the money she earned? Or was it the freedom to make her own choices, to live her life without fear and without hunger? She thought of the people who had believed in her, Mamaze, Mr. Kofi, and the two women she had hired. Their support had helped her reach this point. She realized that true wealth was not just the coins she had accumulated, but the relationships she had built, the respect she had earned, and the courage she had discovered within herself. Still, Amina felt the tension of her new life. Every interaction carried the risk of betrayal or disappointment. She could not afford to be naive, but she also did not want to become bitter or cruel. Every decision, every gesture of generosity, now required careful thought. Her internal struggle grew each day. She wanted to remain kind, to help others, to share her success. But the fear of being exploited lurked in every shadow. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a wealthy city merchant interested in a large, long-term order of her baskets. The offer was enough to secure her financial future for years, yet accepting it would require investing all her current earnings into materials, hiring more workers, and expanding production rapidly. Amina held the letter in her hands and felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. This was the chance to secure her success, but it also came with risk. A wrong decision could wipe out everything she had worked for. She thought of the villagers who had mocked her, the hardships she had endured, and the tears she had cried during lonely nights. She remembered her journey, from the hunger and humiliation of poverty to the careful, exhausting steps that had brought her to this moment. And she realized something profound. Wealth was not just the money in her hands. It was the wisdom to know when to act, the courage to take risks, and the compassion to help others without losing herself. Amina decided to accept the merchant's offer, but she did so carefully. She invested in trustworthy materials, trained her workers well, and monitored every step of the production process. She built a balance between ambition and caution, ensuring that her success could grow without compromising her principles. As the first large shipment was sent to the city, Amina felt a quiet satisfaction. Her life had changed dramatically. She could now afford comfort, security, and opportunity. But she also understood that wealth brought new tests, challenges of trust, patience, and morality. She realized that true richness was not only about surviving or escaping poverty. It was about navigating the responsibilities that came with power, money, and influence. And as the sun set over the village of Kifaru, casting golden light across the dusty streets, Amina stood outside her workshop, breathing in the warm evening air. She had achieved wealth, yes, but she knew that the next trial was already on the horizon. It was not the poverty she had left behind that would define her future. It was how she chose to use the power, influence, and money she had earned. And in that realization, she understood that her journey was far from over. True tests were still to come, tests that would challenge not her hands or her skill, but her heart. The sun rose slowly over Kifaru, bathing the village in a gentle golden light. The once dusty streets now carried a quiet energy. People moved about their day with a newfound sense of hope, their eyes bright with the possibility of change. And at the heart of it all stood Amina. Her small workshop had grown into a thriving business, employing several villagers who once laughed at her struggles. The baskets she wove were now known far beyond the village, admired for their beauty, strength, and care. Yet, Amina's greatest pride was not in the wealth she had earned, it was in the lives she was able to touch and transform. She walked through the village, greeting familiar faces with a warm smile. Some of the villagers, who had once doubted her or mocked her, now approached her for guidance, advice, or help. And she offered it willingly. Her actions were not born from obligation, nor from a desire for recognition. They were born from understanding, empathy, and the memory of her own hardships. Amina had learned that wealth was not merely money or possessions. True richness came from strength, compassion, and the courage to rise after suffering. She used her resources to improve the lives of those around her, repairing homes, helping children attend school, and supporting families in need. Every gift she gave was infused with a reminder of the struggles she had endured and the resilience she had found within herself. One afternoon, she stood beside Mamaze's shop, watching children laughing and running along the streets. She thought back to her own childhood, filled with hunger, loneliness, and quiet suffering. And she realized how far she had come, not just in material wealth, but in spirit. She had become a beacon of hope, a living testament that life could change if one refused to give up. The villagers now looked at her with respect, admiration, and even inspiration. She had risen above poverty, doubt, and mockery. Yet, she remained humble, grounded by the memories of her past and the lessons she had learned along the way. As the evening sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Amina paused and reflected. Her journey had been long, painful and uncertain. She had faced hunger, betrayal, and fear. She had questioned herself, battled exhaustion, and endured ridicule. And yet, every struggle had taught her something invaluable: resilience, patience, compassion, and the true meaning of success. Amina smiled softly. True wealth, she realized, was never measured by coins or possessions alone. It was measured by the strength of the heart, the courage to face life's hardships, and the generosity to help others rise alongside you. And with that understanding, she knew she was richer than she had ever dreamed, not only in wealth but in spirit, wisdom, and the profound power of hope. The village of Kifaru would never forget her story, and neither would she. She had found the true meaning of richness, and it had nothing to do with gold. It had everything to do with strength, compassion, and the courage to rise. By now, Amina's life had transformed. The basket she wove had brought her wealth, security, and respect. Her small hut had become a comfortable home, her hands no longer raw and bleeding from endless work, and her heart carried a quiet pride in what she had achieved. Yet, true tests were never about material success, they were about the heart. It came one morning when the village square was unusually busy. Word spread quickly that some villagers who had once mocked and scorned Amina were now facing hardship. A terrible drought had ruined their crops, leaving families hungry and desperate. Among them were Django and his friends, the very same people who had laughed at her while she carried firewood through the village, the ones who had whispered cruelly about her poverty. They approached Amina's gate slowly, heads bowed, hands empty, and eyes filled with unease. "Amina," Django began, his voice unsteady. "Please, we need help. Our families, they have nothing to eat. We don't know what to do." Amina felt a knot tighten in her chest. Memories flooded back, the mocking laughter, the whispers, the countless times she had gone hungry while they looked on. Anger rose quickly, hot and sharp, threatening to overwhelm her. She could see the fear in their eyes, the shame they carried, and part of her wanted to turn away, to ignore them, or to let them feel a fraction of the pain they had caused her. For a moment, the choice seemed obvious. Revenge would be easy. She could refuse, let them suffer, or perhaps make them pay for their past cruelty. She could finally take the power she had earned and wield it against those who had hurt her. But as she stood there, looking at them, another thought crept in. She remembered her own past, the nights of hunger, the loneliness, the endless struggle, and she realized how much she had relied on kindness, patience, and support to survive. Had she not been shown compassion along the way, she might never have made it this far. Her hands shook slightly as she considered her decision. Forgiveness was harder than revenge. Generosity was more challenging than resentment. But she also understood that bitterness, no matter how justified, would only weigh her down. It would not heal the past, nor could it create a better future. Amina inhaled deeply, letting the tension leave her body in a slow exhale. She looked at Django and the others, seeing not only their shame but also their humanity. She thought of the village as a whole, the people who had once doubted her, the children who looked up to her, and the community she could help shape for the better. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but gentle. "I will help you," she said. "Your past actions, they hurt me, yes. But holding on to that pain will not change your lives, and it will not help you now." The villagers blinked in surprise. Relief and disbelief mixed in their expressions. They had expected anger, punishment, perhaps even a refusal. Instead, they found forgiveness. Over the following weeks, Amina worked tirelessly to assist the struggling families. She provided food, water, and supplies. She helped them repair damaged homes and guided them in preparing for future droughts. Each act of kindness was measured, careful, but full of genuine compassion. She did not give blindly, she gave with wisdom and boundaries, ensuring that her generosity empowered others rather than enabling dependence. Through this process, something remarkable happened. The villagers who had once scorned her began to change. They worked harder, listened more, and treated one another with greater respect. Many apologized sincerely, acknowledging their past mistakes. And in that act of giving, Amina discovered a deep sense of peace she had not known before. One evening, as she watched the sunset from her porch, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Wealth had given her comfort and security, but forgiveness had given her freedom. It freed her from the anger and bitterness that could have consumed her. It allowed her to see her own strength, not just in her skill or labor, but in the compassion that guided her actions. Even the hardest moments of her life, hunger, poverty, humiliation, were no longer chains but lessons. They had prepared her to make this choice. They had taught her the value of empathy, patience, and understanding. Amina realized then that true power was not in the wealth she had earned, nor in the recognition she had gained. True power was in her ability to rise above resentment, to transform pain into compassion, and to use her success to uplift others. She knew that some villages might never change, and that some scars could never fully heal. But she also knew that forgiveness was not about others, it was about herself. By letting go of anger, she allowed her heart to remain open, her mind clear, and her spirit strong. In the quiet of the evening, the village seemed brighter. Children laughed as they ran through the streets. Families worked together in the fields, their energy renewed. And in the midst of it all, Amina stood as a symbol, not just of wealth, but of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of compassion. For the first time, she understood completely that her journey had never been solely about escaping poverty. It had been about discovering strength, courage, and wisdom. And in the act of forgiveness, she had found the richest treasure of all. Amina smiled softly, a quiet warmth spreading through her chest. She had faced the test of the heart, and she had passed. Her life, her village, and her spirit were forever changed. Forgiveness had not only healed old wounds, it had created a future filled with possibility, respect, and true richness.